Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together, we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm joined on the show today by Lucy Legan. Lucy, like me, has been a permaculture educator for decades, and 25 years of that she's been living in Brazil, where she's co-founded the largest permaculture centre in Latin America with her husband, Andre Suarez. It's called Ecocentro IPEC. Now, Lucy's passion is education, and particularly with children. At their centre, they ran permaculture as well as for adults, but so many for children, for schools of young people around the region. And she also helps schools to start their own gardens and curriculums. And stemming from that experience, and because she's a qualified teacher too, she's just published a new book, her latest book actually, called Planet Schooling: How to Create a Permaculture Living Laboratory in Your Backyard. And what a perfect time for a book like this to emerge into the world. So Lucy's story is incredibly inspirational, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hi everyone, it's Morag, and it's my great pleasure to welcome to the show today Lucy Legan. And Lucy is based at the moment just a little bit south of me, in the north, even Northern Rivers or Byron area, where
Mullumbimby.
Mullumbimby, that's right. I
Yeah,
knew it was around there somewhere.
yeah.
But she hasn't been there for that long. Her world has been over in Brazil for quite some time, doing a lot of incredible work with permaculture education. And Lucy's book, Planet Schooling, is about, well, it has hit the shores, but it hasn't been released yet. So I'm so excited for you, and but for to be able to share this with the world, because it's a remarkable book that you've created, and it's going to be so helpful to so many people who are wanting to create, like you say. I'm just going to get the right words: how to create a permaculture living laboratory in your backyard.
That's right.
And so maybe we could just start there with, what is planet schooling?
Right. So I often, when I often listen to the call of action that comes like within me. And during the first lockdown, when the planet started locking down, a lot of people were writing to me, because I have homeschooled my daughter, was, how do we do this? I don't know if I like my kid anymore, because they were homeschooling, and, this new little being came out. It was difficult for parents, because parenting is one thing, but homeschooling is another, because you do have a little bit more structure, and you have to teach them certain things. So a lot of parents wrote to me and said, oh my God, I'm going to kill my kid. I can't handle it. What do I do? So I was like, we're lucky in Australia and several other countries that we do have a backyard. So the idea was that, okay, how can we get permaculture, the idea of permaculture education, back to parents? So during this moment of lockdown or homeschooling, they can actually use their backyard to teach their children. And, the children will be calmer, because research shows that get kids out to the environment and they learn better, and parents will be happier, and happiness and love will be restored in the family. Big
It's a
task.
very noble goal, and very realistic as well.
Yeah.
I homeschool my kids too, but I think it's what happens too is there's a difference, I think, between schooling at home and homeschooling. And so what your planet schooling book and all the ideas in that is really trying to steer people towards the homeschooling, or, well, beyond that, it's what the title suggests is that it's about schooling for us to be, living a one planet life, to be caring for the planet, to be seeing beyond ourselves, to be seeing beyond, our worlds in our homes, but in to see how we connect globally in so many different ways.
That's right. And, we're really lucky in Australia. Our lockdown has been really subtle, but there's still other countries like Brazil and America that they're still homeschooling. And, the kids are still at home, and they don't have that luck of having such a large backyard, because that's also a curiosity for Australians to have such a large backyard. But most of my experience has come from Brazil. I lived 25 years in Brazil, and all the experiences that I share in the book are actually experiences that were created in an economy, a low socioeconomic economy, where children don't have access to many objects. And how could we create amazing things with hardly any money, but still follow, a permaculture education, and also follow the dream of that, that everything, creation is possible. And that was what really backs my word.
That's so brilliant, because that means that it's not just a hobby for people who can afford it. It's an anybody's thing, and we're seeing that in the work that we're doing with refugee settlements in East Africa, that that you can create permaculture living laboratories out of whatever it is that you've got around you. And it's fantastic that you're bringing that and making it so accessible. So just run us through a little bit what's in the book. In the book, what are people going to see in this book?
But it's actually a mini design course for parents and children. So how do you look at your backyard, and how will you create a new design so you can create we basically work with zone 1 and 2 and 5. So in your backyard, how can you create these zones using the space you have? using critical theory and creative theory, and then from that design, then you can start learning the learning process. So learning process in this book is also for parents, because to create a new vision of a backyard or a front yard or a side yard, parents have to release that control of having to control a space, and allow children to redesign. And I really use the tag of redesign their own futures, because we haven't done a very good job of it. And I noticed that especially in many public schools in Brazil, the adults did a horrible job of designing the schools. It's small play areas, mainly concrete. So I was really lucky to find some teachers or directors that agreed for the children to redesign that space. So that often meant crashing concrete grounds and creating gardens. So there were some really out there teachers that believed that students and children could redesign their future. Because, as I said, many adults have done a horrible job, and it's like we need to give them space. So that's the challenge, I suppose, for parents, is that if they love their lawn and then, the child says, let's rip this lawn up and this is a part of my design, is letting go of that, because it's a learning experience. And children, the way I see it, children intrinsically know how to create nature spots. They understand insects and amphibians and much more profoundly. And we did too, as children, we did too, but something happened in our education where we lost that contact, and we thought that lawns and concrete and, creating concrete jungles and, was a better idea. And nowadays we know it's not. So we're trying to regreen urban areas and regreen our own backyards.
So let's just take a bit of a step back. There's two questions I wanted to ask you. Well, so many, but the first one that jumped out of my mind when you started talking then was you were saying about zone 1, zone 2, and zone 5. Now, most of the people who are listening here know what that is, but I'm sure there's other people who are going to be listening who maybe don't know what the zone that means. Can you just unpack that a little bit, and then I'll move into my second question?
Sure. So zone 0 is your center of energy. So in schools, it's obviously the playground. In your home is your zone 0. So zone 1 is next from zone 0. So it's the schoolyard, it's your backyard. It might be a community kitchen if you're lucky enough to live in a community. So it's an area where humans get together, and zone 1 expands from that. And usually it's intensive gardens, it's creating habitats for insects, and lots of other yummy goodies. And then zone 2 it's stretching from zone 1. So we're looking at food forests, maybe hot composting piles. We're looking at maybe larger ponds. And this also depends on how large your space is and how big your school is. And zone 5 is probably some of the favorite, many people say it's their favorite zone, and that's going back to the wild. So it's you creating a zone where it's going to be untouched. You're going to let it get messy, and you're going to see what nature does with it. And you'll help nature by planting certain insectary plants in your backyard. So you've got the insects and the amphibians and the frogs and the lizards all coming back to that space. That was a really quick.
That was brilliant. Really good point. I think that's great. And also too, the way I often describe it too is that zone 5 then also just is kind of a layer that is over everything. You bring the wilderness spaces into everything that you do. And also about how you really try and make sure that all of the inner zones are as compact as possible, that we can meet our needs and have the smallest footprint so that we can rewild as much space as possible. It's kind of a beautiful way to think about it too.
Yeah. So I often tell people, Morag, I often tell people that you create your paths, and whatever isn't path is a garden.
Yes. Exactly.
Whether it's a garden for nature or a garden for a kitchen garden or a garden for, for pleasure.
I love that flip. I love that flip, because often we see design from beds. There'll be a raised bed here and a raised bed there, and all the rest is the path. Whereas I think if you start from the paths, everything else just starts to make sense, because you get your flows happening.
Exactly.
You know where you need to go, and then everything else just kind of. And if one of those little nodes within between paths happens to be a nice little open space of grass that is where you can sit and have your picnic, that's okay. But it's not the whole thing being grass, or the whole thing just being big swathes of nothingness in between a few beds. I think It
Yeah.
allows us to shift how we interact with the space. So
Yeah.
much so.
I actually remember having a discussion and almost argument with Bill Mollison with this concept, because he was saying, okay, he actually came to visit our project in Brazil. So today we were lucky enough to have David Holmgren visit, and also Rosemary Morag, a lot of the rock stars of permaculture. And I remember having that discussion with Bill Mollison, because he was like, well, this really is just pretty and really pretty things. And I was like, because a part of, I think, and this is how permaculture probably changed from being agriculture to something permanent, because we really need that prettiness and that art. And like in my backyard, I have one area just of succulents. I mean, and what is the use of having succulents in my garden? It makes me feel good. It makes me, I look at them and it's delicate, and you see the nature's patterns, and my grandson loves it. And, maybe it might not be useful in a permaculture sense, but in a culture sense, definitely. I think also, and this is where children really get it, because they like putting, sometimes you might think, well, this is really not, it's not edible. It doesn't really fit this and what, but it's beautiful. So it stays. And it gives me a sense of peace, and if
you're going to connect more, and your kids are going to connect more, your grandkids are going to connect more, it's going to get them outside, it's going to get them engaged, and then other things will start to connect with that. And also the beauty that you created in the buildings at your center in Brazil. I think that ethic of beauty, I think just emerges from everything
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And I've got a couple of slides to share with people. That was the sense of, okay, it doesn't only have to be functional, it has to be aesthetically pleasing. And that was the way I always used to joke and talk to my partner about, we have to make soil look sexy, because if it doesn't, people are like, no, I want concrete. So we stretch the boundaries of cement and concrete, to make beautiful structures that collected water. But also we and you'll see, we use soil in a really beautiful manner that people can't believe. Wow, this is a soil building. Building made in soil.
I think that's really interesting too, because particularly where you were in Brazil, to invite people into a space like that, to see how things could be done differently. It has to functionally make sense as well.
That's
but
right.
It needs to touch people at a heart level. So it needs to be practical and beautiful, as something so inviting that you want to sort of head towards that, because changing from what you've got now takes energy. And so it's got to be really worthwhile to make that shift. And I think, by drawing people out. But my second question that I was alluding to before was, it's tied to all this, but I really wanted to ask you to share with us a little bit of your story about, well, how did you actually end up in Brazil in the first place? I mean, you're obviously Australian, but you've spent 25 years in Brazil. How did that happen?
It was a bit crazy, because my partner Andre is Brazilian, but we were living in Australia, in central Queensland, and he had just opened a small, after doing a permaculture course with Bill Mollison down south, which was in fact this area. He went back home and he decided to. I was organic gardening. He decided to change the space, and I was actually not very open to permaculture. I was just like, hey, dude, you're encroaching on my garden. You have your own garden and I'll have my own garden. And then I was spying on his garden. And the difference between organic gardening and permaculture was the design element. And I started picking up on things and started enjoying the idea of doing permaculture design. And then we were like, okay, let's go visit your family for a year. We've been here for 7 years or 6 years. And we went to visit Andre's family for a year, but ended up living 25 years or 20, maybe 23 years. And of course I was coming back to Australia, but I really took this challenge of creating a permaculture. Firstly, I thought it was just going to be a permaculture space, maybe a household, but then it's ended up turning into a massive center. And that's because that time in Brazil, people really needed hope, and people really wanted to change from a non-organic diet to an organic diet. There's something like I think the total is like Brazilian people drink about 5 liters of agrotoxic chemicals a year because of all the stuff. Now, I'm not sure what Australians or other cultures are doing, but somebody actually measured that. So if, looking at their diet, that's how much each Brazilian is drinking. I'd be curious to know how much we're drinking in Australia if you don't have an organic diet. So it was a moment, the first world social forums. We were a part of the forums, and it was a moment of excitement in Brazil. So people really, they jumped on board. So we had a property, and within 10 years, we had a massive forest. And I'll show one of the slides, the before and after. And that really shows that a small group of people can actually create a positive human footprint, not always negative, because, we have this sense of, wow, eco footprint. But we decided to say, okay, we've got a piece of land that has nothing. Let's reverse that and have something.
Do you want to show us the pictures now?
Let's go to the share screen. So you'll see here the before and after shot. You can see that?
Yep.
Great. So you can see the land, there's like nothing. And 10 years later, you can see how much forest was rebuilt just using permaculture agroforestry techniques, also a bit of syntropic techniques. Now, our land stops at the green belt. That's actually a creek. So it's so exciting to see the neighbours. Just from watching IPEC grow, the neighbours started to change their ways as well. So you can see a lot more green. People started planting forests. It wasn't the way we planted forests, but they were still planting.
So just can you tell us what IPEC means? But also just describe the word that you use, syntropic. I'm not sure everyone would be familiar with that either.
Right, syntropic came from a chap called Ernest Gescht. He's a guy from Switzerland that's living in Brazil, and he created a methodology of creating forest in a rapid way. There's a few differences to permaculture, like they don't plant on swales, where I enjoy planting on swales. I like finding nature's curves and following what nature offers and collecting water and planting forests on the curves. Syntropic has a great way. It's a heavy chop and drop. So you plant trees and you radically chop them, and then they produce fruit. So there's a lot of similarities to agroforestry permaculture way, but there's also some differences. So because I was in Brazil and people were writing to it, parts of the forest here was syntropic, and I did plant on swales, which in the end, the result is the same. In the end, you have a massive forest in the end. But I suppose for degraded areas, syntropic is a really fast way of returning nutrients back to the soil. As you can see, the soil is quite degraded. This is the Cerrado, which is similar to savanna. So it's in the middle of Brazil, and it's where they grow lots of soya for the planet. So it's an area that has, like in the region we live, it's about 124 waterfalls. So it's really precious in water. It's where the birth of the waters of the Amazon starts. So it starts in the Sahara and goes down to some of the Amazon. So it's a really important place to protect. It's now classified hotspot.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you saw as the impact of soy growing in the area, both ecologically and socially?
Yeah, it's, it enslaves people, basically. People are paid nothing, hardly anything to mechanically produce soya, and the industrial farming system just sucks all the water out. And thank goodness they don't place pesticides like I've seen in America. They don't have planes and that in this area. It's a hand pesticide, but it still damages the farmer or the worker and the space and the water area. So,
and the headwaters too of
exactly.
Amazon,
the groundwater.
Yeah, and I wondered too whether the sorry, just to have this sideways conversation while we're looking at your place. But, so the soy that's grown there too, is that mostly for animal feed that you've
it's for animal, it's for also for paint, believe it or not. the soya ink. So a lot of the newspapers we have today that we don't like, I get a newspaper delivered to me weekly. I don't want that newspaper delivered to me, but it's just delivered to me weekly, a local newspaper. And that's basically, I look at it for a second and throw it straight in the recycling bin. So that's like soya paint just going straight to the bin. So there's some crazy things we have on this planet, and that's one of them, planting soya. I understand when it's for food, but not often is planted for food, because Brazilians particularly don't have, we have soya sauce in Brazil. There's not much tofu production. So it basically goes to cows.
Gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's continue to have a look.
I thought I'd flick to the next one. So inside that forest, these are amazing things that you find. So you find we have a lot of students come from all over the place now, but mainly Latin America. We have African students, a few people from the States. Not many Australians come because it's so far away. But you see, we love working with soil. So you have all these wonderful, crazy structures. And most of our water is collected by water tanks. I'll just
so
come
now
back.
That you're here in Australia, is there someone over there looking after?
We came back to Australia, and we were supposed to go back maybe 8 months ago. There's a group of young people, and this is when you know you're doing your job right, when you can leave accidentally for a long time, and there's a group of young people that've just taken over the space. So they're still doing courses, and they're doing much smaller courses, but they still have volunteers, and they follow all the correct protocols. So they learned all about COVID, and then they're doing the same protocols that we have here in Australia. So they were it's quite beautiful how they've been working, and they just create. They just keep creating, which is lovely.
I was going to just let people know who are listening to this by audio that I'm going to share the pictures that we just saw with you, because they're beautiful, and that building that had all the lights on it. Tell us what is that?
Yeah, well, that's believe it or not, our classroom. It was made by. With 200,000 hand-pressed bricks. So there's no firing in the bricks. So we made the bricks from the soil of the area. So it's actually a bit of a pit. So we dug out, we've got a tractor. It was a perfect circle. Then Andre, my partner, he created this with local builders that had no experience of creating domes. And they made a giant compass. It was so beautiful. It was so simple, but it was like a giant compass, and the compass kept them intact. So they were able to each time bring the compass in to close the dome. And we had IPC, I think 7 inside of that, which is the International Permaculture Conference. And this is where we watched the, international permaculturists do their thing. Make their plans.
So I'm interested though in what the local people thought about what you were doing there in the gardens, and how you saw them respond to what your gardens and building methods were like. What did they say?
Yeah. Well, I actually use Andre's methodology, the same he used on me. So then I was like talking about permaculture, and they were like, silly gringa, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So I thought, right, that's it. So I'm going to create the most beautiful vegetable garden they've ever seen. And of course, my lettuces were way larger and juicier than their lettuces. And I was like, it's just the way I garden, and look at my garden here. And slowly, because a lot of the women weren't so proactive in coming close to me, but the men were like, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? And they couldn't believe I was doing it organically. So we have some really beautiful stories of our local valley, of people that came to work with us, and the women that came to work with us, how they changed their whole agricultural system. And the most exciting thing, actually, I just got little bubbles then, prickles, was that one of the young people that worked with us for maybe 10 years, he's now the Secretary of Agriculture, and he organized the whole community to plant organic rice that on the market is worth about 3 million real, which is like $1 million. And So they sell most of the brown organic rice, but they keep a large portion for the local schools, because in Brazil, children are fed at schools. They're not fed at home. They're fed a meal at the school. So the kids now eat organic rice in that town. Yeah.
Fantastic. Look, these stories of how it can ripple, and how by inspiring people, and then they take it to wherever they're going to. So whether you become, a leader in your local community, or you're a teacher at the local school, or whether you're a gardener in someone's place, those ideas, once they kind of find a place in you, can start to bring change, and change at all different levels. So I wanted to just touch a little bit more on your school experience. So while you were there, you worked a lot with schools and created materials for schools, and I think, didn't you get some curriculum approved by government or something?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about how you managed to take your ideas and ripple them through the school system.
What we did, we opened the centre for schools. So any public school could come for free, and private schools had to pay a small fee just to pay the person that was guiding them around. And what, often came up was like, yeah, it's okay for you. You're living in this paradise and we're living out there. Because people didn't really see what it was like at the beginning. They just saw the not even the end product, because it is never an end product. It's an evolving product. An eco centre. So they saw this and they were like, yeah, it's easy for you. What about us? And I was like, right, call to action. And that's something I follow often, is that when I hear the call to action, I think, yeah, they're right. I'm living in a little, Alice in Wonderland, a beautiful area. I'm going to see if I can do that in every school. So it's really listening to that when, if nature gives you that call to action, or if another person gives you that call to action, to really grasp it. And I see that with the Perma Youth, the group that you're creating. So it's so exciting. But back to the story. So then I was like, okay, I found a school that was interested in changing. And I have some photographs here that I think are going to blow your mind as well. And I spoke to the students and, asked them if they were interested in doing this project. They loved it. And then we found other Brazilian educators to jump on board, because I didn't want it to come from a gringo. And that's really strong in the Latin American countries, that I am an outsider. I will forever be an outsider. Just the fact that I have blue eyes, I will be an outsider. So I accept that. So how I incorporated that. So I'm an outsider. So I need Brazilians on board with me. And then, that was easy because a lot of people believed in the project. And then we changed one school, then another school, then another school. We only changed public schools. We were, if private schools wanted us to change their space, they had to pay. We were very clear about that, because the difference between a public school and a private school in Brazil is huge. It's like, the other sides of a rainbow. So we were quite definite that private schools needed to pay to support the project. But private schools got this. We found money to help them do this.
So you got some photos to share with us?
Yeah, I'm going to share the screen. So we wanted to encourage a partnership ethic with children, that they were becoming partners with Mother Nature. So I'm just going to jump to, this is one of the schools. You can see this is their play area. They weren't allowed to use this area because some builders started a project, and the director didn't really know why it stopped or how this happened, but this was like maybe a few years that the students were looking at this. So we gave them a mini design course, the same as an adult, but of course the techniques are different. Some kids, they didn't want to draw the space. They wanted to use clay, and they, measured out the space and designed the area, tested the soil, just like we would test the soil. So, was it good for building? Was it good for growing? And, the kids that were right into measuring and mathematics were encouraged to map the space. And so here we go. This is before, you remember. Now, this is 1 week later. So we had a 3-day working bee. Now, Brazilian schools are different to Australian, or I think also European American schools, as that a school is divided up into three areas. So little children arrive at school from 7 to 11. They have their lunch and they go home. The middle school starts at the school at 1:00 and goes until 5:00. And then some schools have the next class, which are the high school students, and they come in at 7:00 and finish 11:00 at night. Okay, so it's a real challenge to try to get a design that each area, each period is happy with, and they won't destroy the work of the earlier period or later period. So, but saying that, having 600 little hands on the project created this. This is 1 week later.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Isn't that amazing? So you can see super Adobe benches. We fixed the tables up. Obviously, the famous herb spiral is in the middle. Little gardens. So we have a little zone 5 was where you can see, I think you can see little plants that we planted in the corner. And then you have the aquatic area, introducing a water element, because that was part of this, that could be part of this science. So to connect with teachers, we were like, okay, we can create a beautiful space that you can also have outdoor classroom. And you can see we have planted larger plants, and these things we accessed from IPEC. We just grabbed things from home to throw in there.
Wonderful. So those tables were based on the top of the structures that were already there,
Yeah.
I'm gathering. And
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you make the top out of? You said super adobe.
No, so the top is actually in the area. There's a mine, a beautiful area has been mined for a stone. It's almost like a slate. So this is a massive stone. That's
Adobe.
Yeah, but the Adobe the Adobe benches are behind that, where the students could sit and either have lunch or classes. So the teacher was really happy as well, the teachers, because they could take classrooms outside.
Wow.
Now, I just want to show you a different school. This school was quite radical for me. It was quite upsetting at first. You can see that there's a big black spot on the wall. This area was tiny, and kids couldn't use that area because the neighbor kept throwing hot oil out the window, because the house is right up against the wall, and it would dribble down, and it created a disgusting insect-infested soil that was, just oil. So we did some critical thinking. The kids called us and they said they wanted to play back in the area. So after the kids wrote to the neighbor, because the teachers approached the neighbor was never really interested in changing her ways. But, when you have 100 kids come up to you, I think it was quite a little bit disturbing for us. So she promised she wouldn't do it anymore. So the kids learnt natural building techniques, so they could paint the wall and plaster it so it would be more beautiful, and it was turned into a garden space. So you can see the before, during, and after. So that's what the kids were playing. You can see they painted the walls and created a compost pile and became more dynamic. And the neighbour, you can see the window in this photograph, the neighbour stopped throwing oil. So there's a lot of things that are happening in countries that we have legislation, and we may I'm just going back to you. Yep. Oh, sorry. So we have legislation, and we have maybe laws that protect us. There's other countries that have great laws, because Brazil has amazing environmental laws, but it has a population that's large and different. This neighbor had different ethics. So it was a challenge for the teacher. Was really nervous because she knew the person in a private setting. I was like, okay, let's keep it, the green gear will pick this up with the children. And they created a beautiful area.
And I bet, the neighbour's probably really happy looking out on this beautiful area now. It looks like these flowers and
Yeah, and she has a bit more compassion as well, because her kids went to the school but grew up, and for her, that was closed. Yeah. So she's been there, done that, but of course other children. And of course there were a lot of beautiful repercussions, because then, as the kids turned into teenagers, they're doing their own things now, and they're creating their own projects. And, there's composting toilets now in the Amazon, which, is amazing, and the same design that we use. So it's pretty exciting.
It's so fantastic. It's just amazing. And I think, being creating an opportunity for young minds to create and design and respond to their situation and work collaboratively to do these things. I mean, they're the skills it's the practical skill on the ground, but it's also those skills of the thinking and the imagining and the negotiating and all that stuff that comes in within that is so important.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Consulting, and also conflict resolution is a big one. Okay. And this is where I think, once again, children are much more open than adults because we come with our baggage. And, if we're going to create, and, we've both teachers of live students. So, you give them a design challenge and sometimes it's like, whoa.
I like to see what you were doing there too with their designs, the children's designs using modeling. It brings it to life, doesn't it? I mean,
for sure.
Sometimes in some contexts we understand the 2D, but in other ways it has a flatness. Well, it obviously has a flatness that comes to life when you can start to model and play. And I think that helps when you're doing a collaborative design because everyone can kind of see it.
Yeah, for sure.
And have a play, and whether it be a sandpit or a like the clay that you were doing there. That was really lovely.
Yeah, and I think also it's important for children that you do have all those. Say you're a mum or dad or auntie, uncle, and you're going to create this backyard permaculture living laboratory, and one child is mathematically inclined and the other one is artistically inclined. You can blend both to your benefit. That sure you help the person who's more creative look at it, the logic side of the design. And the child that's more logical, you look at the creative side. So you get a really beautiful blend with your and it's the moment. And it's really, I know it's really difficult for parents because I was trained as a teacher. It's much easier for me to think that way because I had 5 years of training. But parents, if they start small and, start from their 0 and then they go out to their 1 and just, small steps before you know it, you have a beautiful space that children would naturally be attracted to. Like my grandson, I did this with my daughter, and then now with my grandson, I throw him outside to help me plant greens, and he loves eating greens.
Yep.
And there's truth in those who plant greens will eat greens.
Yeah.
So all the time.
And I think too, just on that point of where, like, what to do when you're out there, it's like, if in all the homeschooling that I've been doing, my biggest lesson is to follow where the curiosity is.
Yes.
I may have a certain plan of what I think might be a good thing to open the door to them today, but they're somewhere else, looking at something else, interested in something else. And so that's kind of where I go. And also leaving the messy spaces that they can find and dream into and interact with. And there was and even the mud play part, section in my garden that was so muddy. My son was always in it. He was always completely covered in mud. He had this whole world going. And then finally we finished the decking on the side of the house and his mud section got covered over. Oh my gosh, he was devastated. So we had to go and make another muddy spot just up a little bit further so we could continue to do that because he was working stuff out in there. He was making things, he was building things. He had a whole lot of, interesting, really interesting.
Yeah. Intrinsic learning, there's a lot of research behind it, and if you're a homeschooler, you probably see that often a lot as well, that you'll learn. And I think another thing just popped in my mind is that parents don't need to know everything, because my grandson asked me questions, some random question. He's only 7. He'll come out with some random question and I'll be like, okay, shall I make out? No, let's go find it out.
Yeah.
And I gave him as a gift my old dictionary, because nowadays I just Google it, I must admit. I gave him my old dictionary and it was like he found a treasure box.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, wow, you used to look at words like this, and
that's amazing.
Yeah, you look at the old Macquarie Green dictionary, but it's like he's found a piece of treasure and he looks for words. And so, it's, I think, if you don't know the answer, you just find it with them, and they can see that you have lifelong learning as well, that you're not just like, okay, I'm old now, I know, or older, I know, my stuff. No, it's lifelong learning. We'll keep learning, so much. Obviously, I need to learn more about how to share slides on the Zoom.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, that idea that to not be afraid that you don't know everything. And also as a permaculture teacher, I think often when you're just starting out teaching, you think, I can't teach because I don't know everything. You will never know everything about it, but you know enough to be able to set a frame and to be able to hold the space and to enter into that. And the same with the homeschooling, that when you say, oh, that's a really interesting question, let's go and explore that, I think is such an important thing, particularly when you're working with young people. It changes that kind of teacher learner, oh, well, I'll always get something from someone, that you get something from a community of people. You might go, I don't know that, but I know someone who does. Let's go and talk with them. Let's go and see what they do. Or, hang on, I think there's a book on our shelf. Let's go and have a look at that. Or Google, Mr. Google. There's all different possibilities of finding out. And, So,
and I think what you said too, Morag, the idea of traditional and Indigenous knowledge is really important, because there's a lot of stuff that we do, and especially for people that are beginning their permaculture pathway, is to look for knowledge that's already there. So you can Google it, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. So if you can find local people that understand and take that time to listen. I had an interesting experience. I worked in Patagonia in Argentina, and I was working for helping a school create their space, and it had many Indigenous people in this group, the learning group, and I actually learned a lot. First of all, being humble enough to listen, because at first when I arrived, I could feel I was anxious to speak and anxious to tell them all my knowledge. And Indigenous people from Patagonia, they take a long time to explain something. So it's sometimes up to 1 or 2 hours. And that course really taught me to chill out, Lucy, chill out and listen, because he asked a question, but in fact, he's giving you so much more. And that was, I really had to calm my, the way the whitey thought. So I was called, I got to teach you something, or really you're not going to get your money's worth. So I want to give you what you want. But it was just like, okay, just listen. And it was such a learning process, because I had to listen for hours, and it was, I wasn't teaching, I was listening. And then I was just like, okay, I get it. I know what they want. So as a permaculture educator, that's one thing I would say, listen to your students.
Yeah.
And then you actually find out what they want. So the course is not just a permaculture course, it's a course that is almost personalized, because you're listening to what they need.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a hard lesson.
It is. And I totally agree that it is about the relationships that you form with the people that you're working with, and taking the time to be present.
Yeah.
And create the platforms where people can be present with one another. Because, like you say, we rush around from this to that and be so busy, but the listening and the time, I learned that down at when I was helping to start the Northey Street City Farm, that, that was the biggest thing, that actually having someone who was in the middle of the city farm, whose role really it was just to listen to what new members who were coming in wanted to learn about, or how they want to connect, or what their story was. So then you could find a way to try and weave their story with the story of the project.
Yeah.
And there was from the get-go, a relationship, rather than just saying, oh, hi, you're new. Okay, will you just pop over to the seedling raising area? And
exactly.
I don't like seed raising. It's and then they won't come back.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that little farm. Some of my photos that I use were from that farm I visited years ago. Oh, nice. And I use examples of community gardening.
Excellent. I'd like to we've been talking for a long time now, but I do want to dive into something else as well with you, which is your work with festivals, because this is kind of exciting as well. And, it's part of this thing of wherever you are, whatever you're doing, there's an opportunity to be sharing permaculture, and that everything that we do, we can turn into a lesson about that. So what did you do at festivals, and how was that a transformative experience, do you think?
Yeah, so what happened in about, I think it was 2005, Boom Festival in Portugal, which is a festival of about 30 to 50,000 people. The owner came over to Brazil and said, And he actually did a course with us. And it was very quiet and reserved. And then near the end of the course, he said, "Can you create an ecological festival?" And we were like, call to action. Of course. Of course we can. If we can call, because it's all about creating the scene. And he came to the eco center and it was all beautiful because he imagined it would be a bit more sterile, a bit more biological, but it was just as creative and biological and permaculture in everything. So we were like, okay, we took the challenge. So in 2006, we worked at Boom Festival and we created the first, not the first composting toilets, but the first composting toilets where the soil would remain on the land. And that was different. And then in 2008, it was gardens, and then it was water systems, and then massive large water systems. And the festival kept winning awards. And then other festivals, the ripple effect was quite amazing. So, we went to the USA and Australia. We've been doing quite a few festivals. And the idea is to bring organic food to people, especially for Europe. I looked after about 20,000 square meters of gardens. And it was a space where people that didn't, because in Europe, the economic range is quite wide. So people that were at the festival, that jumped the fence or whatever they did, they had food available for them because food was quite expensive. So it was the idea of 30,000 people could live in an eco village for a week, where the systems, it was a closed loop system. So the soil, the poo would be turned into compost, the human manure, and also the food that was eaten was turned into compost. So everything was, recycled.
Thank you to set up these systems. I mean, the festival obviously lasts for what, a week or something?
A week, 10 days, yeah.
But to get the gardens happening and all the
things,
I mean, that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, it's like in America, I stayed there for 4 months. In Europe, it's around 3 months. But in the Australian festivals, because I have access to, our systems are quite interesting. We have access to a lot of local farmers and people growing seeds and that, so I can actually just connect with that. And also Rainbow Serpent Festival is in Victoria. It's 2 hours away from Melbourne. So I have access to a lot of materials. But in these other places, I didn't have access. So I had to connect in other cities with amazing grandmas that were still planting their seeds to buy off. And every 2 years they knew, they knew I was coming. They knew what I liked. So they would just plant it and I would buy it. So the local economy also benefited from having eco systems. And it really, and also part of my own personal idea was some of these a lot of young people go to these festivals. They're in a really fragile state. And if you have a garden, it's not just techno and trance or rock and roll or reggae. There's a space that's silent that young people can actually come and reconnect with nature. So at that fragile moment, they find safety with nature, and that sort of embracing. So a lot of my designs were embracing that whoever would come into the garden felt like they were being looked after, hugged by nature.
It's so amazing, and just the scale of that work.
Yeah.
And the possibilities of creating short-term eco-villages or experiences of whole systems communities. The power of that to touch like all those thousands of people, they go away with that feeling that, that was amazing. That was something where I really felt whole.
Yeah.
And then to be able to take that back out into their daily life and wonder, well, how can I transform what I'm doing here to bring some of that, or maybe, actually living in community and taking some of those lessons. So I think it's just such a ground for cultivating new ways of seeing the world. It's just brilliant.
Yeah. And it's a way that adults can enter a young person's life the way they want you to enter, not the way you want to enter their life. So we created areas where they could do mini courses. We had workshops and speakers and things like that, and they would come and go as they please. So it's there. We're here. If you want us, come and talk to us. If you don't, okay, maybe next festival. So, it was a way of also, like I said, reaching, lots of young people. And I've got exciting stories of people that either volunteered with me or came to the course where they're doing amazing things now all around the world. And they say, Boom Festival changed my life, or Rainbow Serpent changed my life, or Strawberry Fields, or, and I had a really funny experience. I was at the last festival, when we had festivals, I was watering the garden, and there were two young girls that were like, you know what? This person's copying Boom Garden and Global Eclipse Garden, the style, because I've seen this everywhere. And I turned around and I said, that's right, it's us. We're going everywhere. And they were like, oh, sorry. I said, no, I'm glad you've seen us. And this is because each gardener does have a certain style. And looking at your gardens, we have a similar style. It's that wild, natural look that, people walk through and they accidentally hit a rosemary and go, oh my God, what's that smell? Or they accidentally hit something, or, and it's that wild nature, but still safe garden that people feel safe in, but they get, little surprises. And that's exactly what I take to festivals, is that idea of like, oh my God, what's that smell? And they don't realize it's just a rosemary, or it's just mint. Or
I think that's so cool though, that someone recognized, in another part of the world they'd seen something and then come back, and then there's this recognizable pattern that they noticed. Oh,
that's right. Yeah, it was really sweet. And she was quite young, and I was like, yeah, that's us. That's us oldies doing it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, Lucy, I'm wondering, how do people find out about all the work that you do and find out about how to access your book when it comes on, or all the stuff that you've got? Let us know how to find you.
I'll share this slide. Oops, no, I did it wrong again. See? Lifelong learning. I definitely need it. So there's our beautiful cover of the book, Happy Kids. And you can contact us at hello@planetschooling.com. So it's quite simple. Yeah. And also we have book purchases. And the book apparently has arrived in Brisbane for Australian people. And, we're just waiting for it to come out of customs, basically.
Yeah, great. All right. So I'm going to put all those links below, and also the website where they can get that and find out more about all the programs that you run, that you do, because it's just amazing, absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for taking the time to sort of unfold your journey through it a bit. Really, I mean, there's so many dimensions to what you do, but what I get from it is that it's totally coming from the possibilities that can happen when you follow that call to action.
That's right.
That's a really big thing that I got out of what you're saying. Is like, when you feel it, you know it, don't you? Like something starts, like it's almost like a vibration, or it's something like this power or fire or flame, or there's a certain little you feel a bit unsettled maybe, or like this, until you kind of make the move to follow that. There's like,
exactly.
So you really do internally.
Yeah, you do. And it's a bit of trusting your intuition, but also trusting when something screams, no, don't go there. You listen to that as well.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's just as powerful.
Because it's not all naive. Yeah, it's not all naive and go, oh my God, I've been called to action. No, it's called to action. You take on the action, but then it starts getting a bit like, oh, this doesn't feel good. You can step back and reassess and know that if you're going to keep following that path, or you're just going to take a curve and go this way to get where you need. And that's happened several times with me as well. I haven't just thrown my arms up and joyously, I've been, oh no, because, I haven't been paid for jobs. I haven't, and that was the naive thing, call to action, I'll do it. And then they haven't supported the project. I'm going, oh my God, I just worked for 3 months for free. But, that's the learning processes.
I know, isn't it? This, and there's sometimes about that too, though. As much as like at the start, you feel like, oh, I didn't get paid for that. But then the other time I look back into it and I think, actually some of the richest learning experiences I've had are from doing those kind of things, like when you've thrown yourself into something so fully.
For sure.
So it's really hard to value sometimes on a monetary scale the kind of journeys that it feels like we both kind of have. It's we need to also be paid for the work that we do, but sometimes, you know, it's not just being philosophical about it. I actually truly mean that, you know, some of the most amazing learnings have come from the work that I've done as a volunteer. But not when you intend to do it, though. It's different, isn't it?
That's right. Not when somebody's connected in contract.
Yes.
And also when like, you know, with the perma group, if people are expecting a certain outcome, it's only fair that, you know, the other party honors that outcome, especially because we're working for a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
We're working for nature. We're working for maybe the future generations. A lot of the times we're not working for our own personal benefit. It's to that ripple effect, because we want other, this is where I suppose my feminist perspective comes in, that especially women working in this area should be paid if there was a contract. And I get a bit like,
look, and I'm just feeling
that's another
into that as well. That it is a whole other topic, but I think maybe it's another conversation, because a lot of people are asking this, like, yes, I want to work in permaculture. This I feel called to action, but how do I actually make it a living? How do I get paid for the work that I do, or create a living through doing permaculture? And this is kind of what you've done throughout your life. It's what I've been doing throughout my life. So maybe we've just created a segue to another conversation.
I think so. And it might be interesting to get other women from other, and we have a
panel of people who work in permaculture. Let's do that. All right.
And this is not to exclude men, because, you know, you may have a sister, a daughter, a mother that's struggling with this too. So we can give hints on how to, you know, especially for women to branch out.
So stay tuned, everyone.
Yes.
You've heard what's coming up soon. Well, thank you again, Lucy. It's been a pleasure to spend the morning with you chatting, and I know that everyone who's listening, there's just so many aha moments and insights there. And I encourage everyone to get a hold of Lucy's book, because it's not only so full of practical ideas, but it's also just a beautiful book that, whether you have kids or not, I think it's going to be really helpful.
That's right. Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lucy. Take care. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us. Head on over to my YouTube channel, the link's below, and then you'll be able to watch this conversation, but also make sure that you subscribe, because that way you'll be notified of all new films that come out, and also you'll get notified of all the new interviews and conversations that come out. So thanks again for joining us. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.